Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Lucas Vasquez from the Minnesota Daily, and welcome back to another episode of In the Know, a podcast dedicated to the University of Minnesota. Recently, Minnesota has once again become ground zero for political and cultural turmoil. This is due to what many are calling an occupation by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement here in Minneapolis. Today, we will bring you a myriad of perspectives on the issue, from students to faculty to protesters on the street. Within this episode, I will be referencing information on past events. If you are interested in learning more, everything will be linked on the transcript. On January 24th, a little after 9 a.m., on Nicollet Avenue South, University of Minnesota alum Alex Preddy was shot and killed by Border Patrol agents. He was shot a total of 10 times. What started as an American citizen lawfully recording federal agents ended in homicide. On January 7th, at around 9:30 a.m. on Portland Avenue, Renee Nicole Good was fatally shot by federal ICE agents while she was inside her running vehicle. Both of these shootings came after weeks of clashes between ICE agents and protesters on Minneapolis streets. Less lethal weapons such as tear gas, pepper spray, and rubber bullets have all been authorized by the Department of Homeland Security as crowd control measures. Despite this label of less lethal, they have left many people greatly wounded, including leaving some protesters blinded. Over the past 3 weeks, my colleague Grace Agner and I have been talking to our fellow university peers and community members, not just about what happened to Alex and Renee and the aftermath of it all, but also about what it feels like to live in the center of all the chaos and uncertainty, to go to class knowing ICE agents are in and around campus. My first stop was student groups. Some of them decided to close their doors, for obvious reasons, but I was curious as to why those who remained open had decided to do so. I first asked this question to Simon Dyson, who is a board member of the Black Student Union here at the U.
First of all, just making sure that this space is open for people, being as though it's one of the only spaces that we really have on this campus. But also, I think the threat is more pronounced and a bit larger for mi gente and some of their students and some of their families. Yes, a lot of students in here are from communities that have been especially targeted by ICE and their operations, but I think it's a very dangerous time for all of us.
A representative of the Feminist Student Activist Collective said something similar.
I think a big part of our group is serving as an open space for all people from all different backgrounds. So we decided to keep our doors open so that people could have a safe place to come and form community. We do have some upcoming resources that we plan on having, such as we do have our Know Your Rights cards, as well as we will have whistles. We will have some other stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks, like food drives coming up. We're trying to give back to the community as much as possible.
I also spoke with a member of Al Medina Student Cultural Center, a group for shared prayer and hanging out with friends, who echoed these sentiments.
The safety of our general body is the most important thing to us, but we also understand a lot of students depend on our room being open, whether it be leaving their things in there while they go to class, their lunch, or just to come in to find a place to pray or connect with our community. So during this rough time, we wanted to keep open to kind of keep everyone aware that we are still here for you guys and we have resources for you guys. But if ever there is a safety concern right away, our doors will close.
I was also curious about what the student traffic to these rooms was like this semester, with all that was going on.
I think it's dropped from last semester quite significantly, which is really understandable. I think also the vibes on campus this semester are a lot sadder and more down, so I think we're kind of doing our best to build that sense of community again. For example, with our fridge, we have people can leave their things, we have our coffee station, we're doing just to kind of build up that warmth of community.
For these first few weeks of the semester, many classes and professors have offered hybrid learning options for students. I asked the members of these student groups whether or not they felt satisfied with the effort of their professors to be accommodating.
For me personally, most of my professors have online options where we can join through Zoom or do asynchronous learning. I think it's really important for professors to make those resources for students who need them.
With classes, I think from the ones that I'm involved in, the professors are doing a really good job about offering online options. I can't speak for every professor since it is their decision right now. I think as a whole, the U of M could be doing better in taking our safety seriously. I think they should take into consideration student voices, because there's so many good ideas that different groups have and different students have. So I really think that they should be listening to us and have that be a dialogue of what can we do to support you guys right now.
A common theme that I started to see was that although the faculty might have been doing a good job, the administration wasn't.
I feel like the university's response has been a bit underwhelming, if I'm going to be honest. They could do a better job at making the campus more safe for people of color as well as international students. They could start by calling this campus a sanctuary campus for all students and making it a safe place for people to come and learn and form community.
What I would like to see from the university is just taking a stand. It's not the time for neutrality. It's not really the time for trying to stay out of it, especially when the people who make the decisions for this university must understand that their students are under threat. I mean, it hasn't even started now. I mean, it even started last year with abductions taking place for graduate students. So I think this is something that has been boiling, has been heating up at this university. And rather than sort of condemning it, coming out strongly and condemning the actions of ICE agents and giving us proper resources to know your rights and things like that, there hasn't really been any of that, which I must say is not necessarily surprising, but you would sort of expect when ICE is murdering people in the streets that we would have a little bit more guidance on what to do.
A member of the American Indian Student Cultural Center said that they do not think the university is doing enough to protect their diverse student body. They expressed anger over the suspected ICE presence at the Graduate Hotel as well.
Some teachers, professors, doctors are being allowed to have their class on Zoom only for 2 weeks, and they're taking it week by week is the excuse that they're using, which I don't think is necessarily good enough. It does give the opportunity for kids and students to be in a place where they feel safe, so they're not targeted in like this hybrid modality, but there's not a statement that has came out. The University of Minnesota is keeping ICE agents in the Graduate Hotel that's on campus. So regardless of them trying to go hybrid or Zoom for students of color or people who feel unsafe of coming on campus, they're building a breeding nest for kids to feel unsafe. So they're contradicting it by giving them a place to stay on campus. It's ridiculous. I don't know what they could do. A statement isn't going to do anything. Kick them out of the Graduate Hotel. Put signs everywhere that says ICE is not welcome.
The Graduate Hotel, which opened in 2017, lies in the heart of the East Bank area of campus. Since its opening, it has been the main collaborator of the University of Minnesota when it comes to overnight stays for sporting events for both teams and fans. It even hosts events for the university in its halls. The university even offers a special discounted rate that can be found on their orientation page. The hottest rumor at the beginning of the semester was that ICE agents had been and were staying at the hotel. I say rumor because although it was never officially confirmed by a professional source, it's been widely accepted as fact on campus. This suspicion has led to multiple noise demonstration protests that have resulted in the arrest of more than 60 students. Neither the university nor the graduate has commented on the situation. When I reached out to the university for comment, I was met with no response. I spoke with Shushmit Raman, who is a member of the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS for short. SDS has been the main organizer for the majority of student-led protests, both in front of the Graduate Hotel and on campus in general.
We're very frustrated, especially when the University of Minnesota and the Graduate are very closely tied. It's University of Minnesota's groundkeepers that keep up the exterior, even though it's off campus, so they say. And so I think it is really ridiculous to say that the University of Minnesota has no stake in ICE being at the Graduate. I also think it is really ridiculous that Cunningham in her emails seems to be referring to these protesters getting up in arms over rumors of ICE staying there, and to not believe everything you hear. I think that is very dismissive, especially when it has been confirmed. One, it has been confirmed time and time again by community members seeing verified ICE vehicles in the Graduate parking lot, by employees being ICE is staying here. To dismiss this as just oh, they're overreacting is baseless rumors is really disrespectful, I think, to all of the protesters and all of the people who have very real fears about ICE on campus. And I think as an administrator, trying to speak to all of campus, extremely unprofessional. I think her statements have been, inadequate is the nicest word I can say.
Poor communication and baseless statements aren't the only thing the university administration has been accused of. On January 26th, 2 days after the passing of Alex Preddy, the university held what they called an online community gathering event for both students and faculty to attend. There would be musical performances and reflections given by university leaders. Music professor Stephanie Arrado was asked by the administration to perform at this event. According to Arrado, she was provided no guidelines on a dress code. She was then stopped from performing and escorted out by police officers for wearing a garment that said "ICE out" on the back of it, which wouldn't have been visible on the live stream as only the front of the performers was being recorded. This incident only fueled student outrage towards university officials. One of the major concerns of both the students and the Minneapolis community has been the violation of human rights by ICE agents. To learn more about this, Grace spoke with Carrie Booth Walling, the director of the Human Rights Program here at the University of Minnesota.
Often in the US context, when we think about human rights, we tend to think of them as for other people in other places, and we don't always think about the challenges in our own community as human rights issues. And this moment, I think, is really making clear that we are entitled to human rights and that they are under threat. So human rights are a powerful idea. They are ideas and norms. There is also some international human rights law to back it up too. But human rights belong to all people on the basis of their humanity. It's about the human dignity that each human being is entitled to. And it's about living a life of freedom and thriving and fulfillment. And these are the things that all people are entitled to, even when our governments don't recognize them. And what's powerful about human rights is that sometimes governments don't give people rights that they deserve, or they violate things like the constitutional rights like we're seeing right now. And that's often where you hear people make these claims to human rights, which must be protected all the time.
Booth Walling listed out some of the human rights all humans are entitled to, which may be under threat right now, such as the right to freedom of association and assembly, the right to participate in government and have government reflect and serve our interests, and the right to freedom of opinion and expression and access to information. She also noted how humans have due process rights and the right to be treated with dignity and humanity, even when being apprehended by police or state agents.
All people are entitled to human rights all the time. And it doesn't matter if you yourself have violated any laws or you haven't, that we're all equally entitled to be treated with humanity and dignity. And so what we're seeing are some pretty gross violations of those fundamental rights. One of the things, what we say in the human rights world about what happened to Renee Good and Alex Preddy is that we have the right to defend rights. We have human rights, but we also have the right to defend our human rights and to claim them and to defend the human rights of others. And both of them were defending human rights of other people when they were killed by state agents. And all around the world, when this happens, we call it an extrajudicial killing or an arbitrary killing. It's an unlawful death committed by police forces. And so that's a language we would use talking about it in other places. And we feel it's important that we use that same language to talk about it here in the United States context. There are lots of other violations. The conditions of detention that people are being held in are cruel, they're dangerous, they're inhumane. People are being denied access to medical care. They're being denied access to legal assistance. Those are illegal actions in international law, as well as a violation of domestic policy. And the United Nations actually has really clear guidelines around policing and rules for use of force and rules for managing protests. The main basic rule is that state agents, police officers, ICE agents, federal authorities, whatever they're called, in your respective countries, that they have an obligation to respect human rights in the execution of their duties. And instead, what we're experiencing here on the ground in Minneapolis and across the state of Minnesota is a violation of fundamental human rights by federal authorities.
But who is ICE? And how are they able to violate these intrinsic human rights? Booth Walling describes how ICE was founded in response to the September 11th terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. Their original mandate was to prevent terrorist attacks from happening inside of our country.
They were supposed to be investigating national security threats domestically. That included things like, domestic terrorism, trafficking networks, drug trafficking, human trafficking. They did have a mandate to enforce deportation of immigrants who were a threat to national security or pose kind of a domestic terrorism kind of threat or threaten public safety. And so what we've really seen over the years, and particularly these last few years, is that the agency has become highly politicized. It has exceeded its original mandate. It's no longer serving that original kind of function. And I think that there's a lot of agreement growing around the country that ICE in its current form probably should not continue, that it no longer has legitimacy to function the way it's currently operating across the country. I mean, what we are seeing in Minnesota is not the removal of individuals who are threatening the national security of our country. And most of these individuals are not posing any threat to public safety. And in fact, we're seeing federal law enforcement, their aggressive, violent tactics are themselves becoming a threat to public safety. And I believe that the legitimacy of the institution has been so undermined that it's difficult to imagine how that institution could regain the trust of a large portion of the American people.
In January alone, ICE has violated a minimum of 96 court orders. We spoke to Linus Chan, a professor at the university's law school and an immigration attorney. He commented on the struggles of battling an agency whose legal shortcomings are backed by the federal government.
One is a violation of the law, right? And one is violation of norms. And the law, there is a lot of question, some of that is contested, right? I could say, for instance, that it is a violation of the Fourth Amendment to go into someone's house without a judicial warrant and arrest someone. ICE is obviously saying that they have a legal memorandum, right? A secret memorandum that allows them to do that, that says it's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. It is a very difficult thing to do, to argue against a secret memo. That's one thing. But second, it's even if there was a legal argument, just because there's a legal argument doesn't mean that they're not violating the Fourth Amendment, right? Like, obviously, it might need a court to say so. So there's one aspect of violation of law. But there's plenty of instances where they have violated the law and they themselves don't even defend that what they're doing is not unlawful.
Chan then discusses the evidence surrounding Alex Preddy's murder and comments on how the lack of urgency for an investigation is concerning.
You have two people that were killed by ICE. They were recorded in daylight with witnesses. I understand that there might be some people that look at that and say that there is some measure of uncertainty, but I have a hard time seeing that, to be quite honest, right? Like, it seems, at least with Alex Preddy's killing, that the video evidence is pretty clear, and the defenses for that have sort of fallen away, right? They said, oh, he brought a gun, but the gun was never displayed. So on what basis did they have to shoot him 10 times? And I haven't heard recently what the justification is. Instead, what I find remarkable is that they say they are negotiating whether they would even do an investigation or allow the state to help do an investigation. Well, why is there a negotiation? A man was killed. A man was killed on the streets of Minnesota by several men at once. Even if there was a fact that is not evident from that video that would somehow make what happened not illegal, it seems very weird to say that we are justifying it by requiring a negotiation. And I don't think anyone needs to be told you can't kill someone who doesn't pose a threat to you in the middle of the street. So how is that not something that is clear, right? And maybe there is an aspect here where there's a presumption of innocence for those Border Patrol officers. Maybe there is a need for trial. But I don't think it needs much to say that something illegal happened, something unlawful happened, and the fact that we are reduced to the point of negotiating whether or not there would be an investigation, where you actually have the people of the highest parts of the federal government saying that they are open a potential use of force investigation, but then you had one official explicitly saying that it's not a big deal. That is remarkable, right?
Chan also noted how it had been reported that more than 600 habeas petitions have been filed, with detainees reporting being held unlawfully. In a majority of these cases, federal courts have found the government guilty of violating the law. He explains that what's interesting is that in many of these situations, government attorneys have not mounted much of a defense. It's not like the judge steps in and says, this is illegal, and the practice stops. Instead, a judge says it's illegal, everyone understands that, and the conduct continues. So more judges have to step in and say again and again that this is still illegal. The idea, Chan explains, is that they're pushing it up the chain, hoping appellate courts, maybe even the Supreme Court, will eventually say it's permissible. But in the meantime, rather than pausing and waiting for a higher court to weigh in, they continue to break the law anyway.
And this is not even counting the fact that they have arrested protesters who clearly were not only doing protesting, and then detain them for hours on end in the federal building, and then release them in the middle of the night, -20-degree weather, without any ways to contact people, without proper clothing. The government isn't saying it didn't happen. They are trying to argue only on moral grounds when the facts are clear, right? They're saying, oh, these people deserve it. These people are trying to make life difficult for ICE. They're against America. But what's important is they're not putting any legal arguments. And that is disturbing, right? The fact that the first thing that they did when they called Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists, you have the President of the United States going on and on about whether or not Alex Preddy may or may not have been a completely good person. That's not relevant. You can't just shoot and execute people even if they're a person that's not a good person.
But despite all of this, students and teachers have been doing their best to continue about their lives as usual. We asked Chan to explain this phenomenon, and also asked him about his recent statements to the New York Times about a second system of justice for the vulnerable.
This is an idea that was born from a philosopher who was looking at how it was that a country can slide into a situation where there is awful and horrific persecution of vulnerable people, and yet the country can still function in many ways, right? People always, and rightfully so, are worried about any comparison to Nazi Germany. We are not in Nazi Germany. This is not the situation. But this kind of look is actually similar to looking at other more recent situations of, slides to authoritarian governments, such as in Hungary, such as modern Russia. So I think it's important to just gain those lessons without necessarily trying to invoke Hitler. But the general idea here is that there is an administrative state and a prerogative state. And the idea here is the administrative state is what normal people, what the majority of citizens need the law to do and function. If you want to get a license for a business, if you want to be able to travel or if you want to do any number of normal things and you are not part of the vulnerable minority and the government has no interest in treating you any differently, then there is a whole system of laws that act and do things relatively normally. This is why, of course, right, commercial activity is relatively still stable. In many ways, a lot of people's day-to-day life may not be affected. And then you have what's called the prerogative state. And the prerogative state is where anywhere in the situation where the government believes that they can act purely on prerogative. And that's when they target enemies and they target the vulnerable.
Chan detailed that a bigger concern is when the criminal justice system starts being used as payback. He noted how it gets especially troubling when you see a criminal charge brought against major public figures, whether it's the chair of the Federal Reserve, the New York Attorney General, or James Comey for allegedly lying to Congress. The political damage of just getting charged has a massive effect. He said that this nature of legal action as payback was seen when the federal government opened cases against Governor Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. In those instances, many believed the cases to be politically motivated.
And I'm worried very much, for a long time, the worry was the line between the laws that work for regularly and the laws that don't. There was already situations where the line was, if you're undocumented, you're on this side. But now that line is no longer that you're undocumented, no longer that you cross the border without permission. But that line is actually more going towards if you're not a U.S. citizen. That means anyone who is not a U.S. citizen. And now we're taking that line and we're actually moving it even farther, right? Alex Preddy, Renee Good, they were U.S. citizens, but now they are being called enemies. You have people who are birthright citizenship cases who have always been known as being citizens, but now we're going to try to say that they're not citizens. So that line no longer becomes, undocumented, documented. It's going to be, non-citizens, citizens. The line keeps going. And that is a big concern, right? It's an example of a slide of power. What's frustrating, of course, is that a lot of people who are on this side don't necessarily see the danger because their day-to-day life isn't impacted or affected. And so it becomes really, really difficult to tell them that what's happening on this side is really important, even if they don't feel it in their day-to-day life. It's not faulting. It's not like something like, gnashing of teeth. Why don't people care more? I mean, there is some times where it feels that way, but it's understandable, right? Life is hard. Right. I think life is difficult. We all have our things that we need to worry about. Students need to graduate. Students need to find jobs. Students have families. Students falling in love, falling out of love, right? There's all these other things that happen, and it can be very difficult to try to pay attention to things that are not there. But it is something that is a really big worry.
Now, despite this structure that Chan is worried about, thousands of Minnesotans have answered the call to protest and disrupt their day-to-day lives. On both January 23rd and January 30th, Minneapolis hosted massive general strikes with over 50,000 people marching on the latter. I went on the scene to get some street interviews to hear from members of the community.
Born and raised in Minneapolis, live in St. Paul now, and what's going on now just betrays everything I learned about the country when I was a kid. Nothing is like it's supposed to be right now. So hopefully things like this will change that.
In your community, what things have you seen change?
We live in a place that's full of migrants from Asia, South America, Latin America, and that just seen the whole neighborhood shut down. People are afraid to go out. There's less traffic. The ice trucks were on the street next to ours last Saturday when Alex was killed, and it's just it's like you got to come out.
I'm an immigration lawyer, and people are afraid, regardless of their legal status, regardless of whether they're trying to do things the right or legal way. They're hidden in their homes because regardless of what their process is, they're being swept off the streets and detained for weeks, potentially months, and they're being shipped off to Texas with no contact with their attorney, including myself, and attorneys have to fight tooth and nail just to speak with their clients.
And your sign on the back says Jesus was a refugee. Tell me a little bit about that.
That he was a refugee?
Yeah, tell me what you like.
What I know, to me is that he was persecuted by Great Herod, and that's why he left there. So it's identical to what you're seeing here now. Yeah, you see a lot of the people that are claiming to be pro-ICE and pro-this like this are huge anti-immigrant. It just doesn't mean, it seems like a huge conflict to me. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So.
And what do you see changes in your own community right now that have been happening with all this?
Well, I think what the coolest thing about this, and I think if you talk to the majority of American, they're sick of the two-party system, right? And so to see politics get thrown out now, and this isn't about politics, it's about human decency, it's about our Constitution, whether you lean left or lean right. These are the things we follow, and we're clearly breaking it. So that's really cool to see in our community. People that definitely have slanted right, definitely slanted left, coming together on the same cause here. Yeah.
At times, when facing a problem this big, it can feel like you might not be sure what you, as an individual or as a student, can do other than just protesting. Booth Walling points out a few things that are avenues of action.
I think it's important to think about movements towards justice and actions towards justice and rights require lots of different people doing lots of different things. And we all have different identities and backgrounds, and that means we have different levels of privilege and risk that we have to assess in terms of how we respond in this moment. And I think it's really important for people to realize that not everybody has to do everything, and that for students who do feel like they want to take action in this moment, that they think really thoughtfully about what their skills and capacities are, and to lean into that and to recognize we need all kinds of people. We need some people who are on the front lines protesting, but we need other people who are not going to protest so that they can help provide mutual aid. We know some people who can be playing music of encouragement and singing and bringing people together. And we need other people to use their voices in advocacy. We need people who are doing legal observation. We also need people who are looking after and caring for their fellow students and, providing support to people who are on the front line. So there's a lot of different ways for students to be involved.
Some of the ways she encourages involvement is by leaning into your own skills, thinking outside of the box when it comes to how I can help those in my community. She also comments on challenging ourselves to not feel bad about not doing as much as we think we should, because self-care is important. She lists simple things as monitoring how much time we spend doom scrolling and taking time to recharge, either alone or with friends.
I would say finding like-minded people, networks of community and support are so valuable and so important right now. And it's important that we take time to care for ourselves, because we can't care for others if we don't also care for ourselves. And I'm afraid this is going to be a long, sustained fight. And so we can't burn out at the beginning. We have to continue to struggle for a long time. So it's important that people are aware, that they read, that they ask hard questions, that they try to understand the moment we're living in and use that to help take the skills they're learning in an academic context and how can I understand this? But we also we can't do that all the time. We also have to recognize that reading every post about something is not itself action, even though it feels like action. And so sometimes we can exhaust ourselves just staying up to date on everything. And we don't want to do that. We want to exhaust ourselves maybe occasionally by taking something more proactive action and then recharging.
For me, as a student, a Minnesotan, and a child of an immigrant, one of the biggest takeaways I've seen over the past few months is that now, more than ever, we must lean on each other and look to our communities to bring us hope in the face of arguably one of the darkest periods in our country's history. And I share the same frustrations as many of those around me, watching families get torn apart, citizens get treated like animals, and the constant harmful rhetoric that the government continues to spread about my communities. It's a lot to handle sometimes. But I would like to say thank you. Thank you to the professors who have the courage to stand up for what they believe in the face of an administration that does not support them. Thank you to the Minnesotans who went out to protest in the freezing cold for change. And thank you to the community members who have stepped up for their neighbors, providing them with transportation, groceries, financial aid, and safety. This episode was written by Lucas Vasquez and Grace Agner and produced by Cece Heinen. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach us at podcasting@mndaily.com. My name is Lucas Vasquez, and I'll talk to you next time on In the Know.